In today's lesson, we are going to be looking at analyzing graphical displays and specifically infographics in our practice worksheet. So this lesson is going to be a little bit different from the other ones because we are going to be incorporating some other subjects into our lesson, primarily English, some science, indigenous studies, and so on. So it will be a slightly different lesson. There will still be some math involved and we are going to tie it in, but the beginning is going to be a little bit of a different warm-up. So this lesson is entitled Talking with Mother Earth. What we're going to start off with is a poem from a book called Talking with Mother Earth. And it is written by an El Salvadorian poet who has written bilingual books, and they've received numerous awards. He's a native Salvadorian, specifically Pipil Nahu Indian, I believe that's how it's pronounced. And he spent much of his childhood in rural El Salvador. So you can kind of see where the inspiration, where the influences come from in his poems. We're going to look at one poem specifically called El Agua. And we're going to hear it read to us by two individuals who are going to read it in Spanish. So we're going to hear it in the language that it was intended. Let's just take a second and just listen to the poem being read.
Qué magia tan pura y tan hermosa, la del agua. Todo lo convierte en vida, en canto, en color. Por todos lados de la madre tierra, veo culebras de agua. Veo espejos de agua. Mi abuela siempre me dijo señalado en río. El agua es sagrada. Es la sangre de la madre tierra.
And next, we're going to hear it from the second reader.
Qué magia tan pura y tan hermosa, la del agua. Todo lo convierte en vida, en canto, en calor. Por todos lados de la madre tierra veo culebras de agua, veo espejos de agua. Mi abuela siempre me dijo señalado el río. El agua es sagrada, es la sangre. Water is sacred, it's the blood de la madre tierra, of Mother Earth.
So those were the two readings, and we are going to go through and read it in English, because again, you may not understand Spanish, but I just wanted you to hear what it sounded like in its, again, the native language of the poem. So, the poem begins with water. How pure and beautiful is the magic of water. She turns everything into life, into songs, into colors. Everywhere in Mother Earth, I see water snakes. I see water mirrors. My grandmother told me as she pointed at the river. Water is sacred. It is the blood of Mother Earth. I'm going to read through it again. Water. How pure and beautiful is the magic of water. She turns everything into life, into songs, into colors. Everywhere in Mother Earth, I see water snakes. I see water mirrors. My grandmother told me as she pointed at the river. Water is sacred. It is the blood of Mother Earth. So again, I want to just read through it twice for you to fully hear it. In case you missed any of it, again, you can always pause the video and read it to yourself as well. So, thinking about first question, what do you think Argueta means when he says the water turns everything into life, into songs, into colors? Right, so this is more of an open-ended question. Feel free to kind of come up with your own answers and think about it to yourself. But as some background information, right, Indigenous peoples, which is kind of the beginning of this kind of little warm-up activity, or how we're kind of tying everything together. Indigenous peoples believe that water cleanses the earth and all living things and is alive. Water is a being and is honored. Right? So they believe that water has this life, it's alive, it's a living thing. You can also think about babies begin their lives in water, right? When they're in the womb, they're surrounded by water. You hear the term breaking, or water, your water broke, right? Just about as you're about to give birth, right? And human lives depend on water, right? You can survive quite a long time without food, but not without water. So human life does depend on water. Water is one of the 4 sacred elements, right? Along with wind, fire, and earth. Many ceremonies include water, right? Regardless of the religion, right? There are many ceremonies that include water in some form. Right? You can think of baptisms, and I'm sure there are. That's the main one that comes to my head that thinking of in terms of water. But I'm sure there are tons of other indigenous or other cultural ceremonies that include water. Many sacred places are located next to water, or at places where waterways meet. Indigenous lifeways are dependent upon and inextricably linked to water for the maintenance of both physical and spiritual health. Right? It becomes spiritual because it makes you alive. So again, that's just some background information. You may not have come up with all of those kind of possible options, but again, that's just some background information about the indigenous viewpoints of water. When Argueta writes that water is sacred, it is the blood of Mother Earth, he is sharing indigenous knowledge. So what message is Argueta relaying about the importance of water when he calls it the blood of Mother Earth? So think about, what message do you think he's relaying by writing that phrase, that water is, he calls it the blood of Mother Earth? Again, you may have different opinions or different answers that come up, but one possible answer is that human beings cannot survive without blood, right? If you get cut or you lose a lot of blood, you're not going to live, right? So with the idea that Earth is a living being, or Mother Earth, indigenous peoples believe that Earth depends on, or they not to believe, they also know that Earth depends on her blood or the water. So it's kind of a parallel idea. Water is the blood from Mother Earth. Earth needs water to survive. You look at areas where there's droughts, or there's no waters, or there's a lack of water, and life tends to not do too well in those environments. And you can think of Mother Earth as a whole. We want the water to be good. Where would you see this knowledge similar to Western scientific ideas on the water cycle? Right? So if you've taken science already, you've probably looked at the water cycle. So where can you see this similar idea, or where this knowledge idea is similar to Western scientific ideas? Right? Well, the water cycle speaks of the continuous presence of water on the earth. Right? It goes through going in the cycle and going through different states, liquid, solid, gas. So we can speak to the water, or to the cycle of water that happens every 28 days with the movement of the moon and the tides. There's the connection to the female cycle in terms of the 28-day cycle. The idea with children living in water for 9 months and being born from water. So indigenous peoples see all life as interconnected, with water as part of the web of creation. So indigenous peoples see the water as an ever-present force circulating through the earth in various ways, connecting people to land and unseen spiritual forces to everyday life. Mother Earth is alive, and she, along with the universe, provides water, and water is essential for her to survive. So again, that's where you can see some of this kind of knowledge, similar in the fact that water is sacred. You can also see it as water being used as a transportation system. The water source could be, or was used at one point as a highway, and still kind of is used today as kind of movement and highways, transportation systems as well. Why might Argueta have decided to include the words of his grandmother in this poem? What does this say about the place of elders in Indigenous society? Right, so at the end he makes a statement about what his grandmother told him. Why do you think he decided to include this portion in the poem? And what importance do you think elders had in Indigenous society? Well, you might, again, many different options that you could come up with. There's no wrong answer. Right? As long as you're thinking critically about it and putting in a good effort, there's no wrong answer. Because again, you may not know anything, and that's okay. But some background information. Again, elders pass along cultural knowledge and skills to the young. They are revered for their wisdom. So the author is honoring his grandmother for the knowledge that she has passed on to him. And kind of in turn, he is passing it on to everyone else who is reading. So elders are respected and valued in both their families and community. So there is also the idea that Mother Earth is all our elder, right? She is the elder to all of us. We now think and treat other things as our elders. We get our knowledge from other sources, right? You can think of Google as being your elder now because that is where you gain your knowledge from, right? And Google is the holder of all history and knowledge, or the internet or technology. Because again, we don't get our information from elders anymore, albeit we still do get some information. If you talk to your grandparents or great-grandparents or your parents or guardians or things like that, I'm sure they will pass along knowledge to you, but it's not all the knowledge. If you want to find out something right now, you could probably go on your phone and find it. But in the past, again, elders were that kind of transfer of knowledge. So we are going to watch, or there is going to be a video that you can watch on YouTube. If you search the story of bottled water, you should find it and it should come up. It is about 8 minutes long, so just to give you a heads up. I'm not going to go into it on here. Again, copyright issues, things like that. So I will let you pause the video and you can go and look for the video on your own, because there are going to be a few follow-up questions that do focus on it. So looking at, or coming back from that video, are there any common values between Indigenous worldviews and the viewpoint expressed by Annie Leonard in the video? Right. So again, different answers may come up depending on what you got from both the video and what you know about Indigenous worldviews, but hopefully maybe some of what we've already talked about can help you in that respect. So Indigenous peoples believe that water and land must be protected and preserved for the benefit of the next 7 generations. So when they looked at preserving and protecting nature, Mother Earth, and everything like that, water, they believed that it must be protected and preserved for the next 7 generations and for the future of all humankind. So if you think about your grandparents, so they're the first generation. Then your second generation is your parents, third generation is you. There are still 4 generations after you that you need to be protecting, or that should be protected, right? And again, starting with you, there's 7 more going from there. So again, it's about how we all kind of have a role in making sure that the earth, water, land, etc. Are protected for the future. In the video, Annie Leonard speaks about preserving Earth and ensuring that everyone has access to clean water, which ties back into the idea that, right, water is sacred, water is life, water is the blood of Mother Earth, that idea. So we kind of see it all tying together. So here is where the math comes in. So here we're looking at First Nation water systems without clean water. Right? So we see the number of water systems on the y-axis, the provinces on the x-axis, and we're looking at 2 different years, 2016, 2020, so a double bar graph. Now, question is, who improved the most, and how do you know? So think about, who do you think or which province do you think improved the most? Alberta, the Atlantic provinces, BC, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, Saskatchewan. So Manitoba, we see the values or the numbers there just to give us a general sense of where the other bars may be, because again, it is a little bit hard to tell with the way the scale is drawn. So again, no right or wrong answer, just kind of what is your opinion. Now, we have the numbers over the bars, so maybe this might help you. Does this change your answer? Or is there anything else that we can do? So again, who improved the most and how do you know? Who improved the least and how do you know? So who do you think improved the least in terms of the provinces? Right? So again, in your previous answer, who improved the most, you might look at provinces like the Atlantic provinces or Quebec, because they improve the most because they have no water systems that are without clean water. So they've eliminated the dirty water systems, you could say. You might look at the percentage. So which province had the greatest drop in percentages? But again, going back to Atlantic and Quebec, they dropped 100% because they've gotten rid of all of them. So who improved the least? Right? You could look at just the numbers, you could look at percentages, but chances are you might think of Ontario. Ontario might have improved the least because they went from 79 to 45. So they still have over 50% of what they had in 2016. So they definitely improved the least, we would say. And what surprised you the most about the information? So again, this is more of an opinion. This is again an opinion question. So answers may vary, but think about it to yourself, maybe talk it over with someone if you're watching this video with someone. What surprised you the most about the information that was presented here? So again, I'll let you think on that for a second. Again, pause the video if you need to. But think about what surprised you the most. What province do you think needs to do better, and why? So again, answers may vary, but hopefully everyone kind of comes to an agreement that Ontario needs to do better, because 45 communities without fresh water or clean water it's definitely too many. I would say even one is too many. If you think of a community, say for example, like Font Hill, right? That is, if you think of a large community like that without water, or even think of your house without water, right? That's probably too many. So not even communities, let alone provinces, let alone a single house, is probably too many to be without clean water. So how can we get the government to do better? So we have our information here. What could we do to get the government to do better? Right? You could think about, well, what if you wrote a letter? Okay, you might think, well, one letter is not going to make a difference. Okay? What if everyone wrote a letter? Or what if we got every grade 9 class to write a letter? Do we think that would make a difference? Right? So again, think about how do you think that we can get the government to do better? Looking at this next graph, so this next graph is looking at all long-term drinking water advisories on public systems, on reserves, are lifted by March of 2021. So that is what they're predicting. So we're looking at water advisories over the years on reserves. And this was updated in January 21st, 2020. We can see again the data, we can see the numbers. Starting in 2016, there were 105 water advisories. So what do you notice and what do you wonder? Is there anything that you notice, and is there anything that you wonder from this graph? Now, it could be how the graph looks. It could be any of the words or the terms on this graph. It could be who created this graph. Right? There's many different things that you can notice, and there's also many different things that you might wonder. Right? So I do challenge you to question and look at this graph and think about what is the information that's being presented. Right? And I'll challenge you to think about some of these or look some of these up. Do you know what's considered a water advisory? Right? What's a long-term water advisory? Is it different from a short-term? Right? How big are these communities that we're talking about? Yes, it's talking about homes and community buildings, but again, where maybe? Where are these located? Who is putting this information out? Or how are they collecting it? You might also wonder, how are they making this prediction? We've looked at graphs before. We can kind of see trends in graphs. We see that there's a drop from going to 105 to 58 over the course of 4 years. And now they're predicting that we go from 58 to 0 in 1 year. Right? You might wonder, where are they getting their numbers from? How are they making this prediction? Are they being hopeful, or are they doing anything? What's causing the drop to happen? Because it seems relatively steady from 2016 to 2018. Then we start to see a larger drop, and now they're predicting from 2020 that there's even a greater drop. So again, what is making our numbers drop, or what is making the prediction think that the numbers are going to drop? So again, those are all questions that hopefully you're thinking about. Hopefully you maybe thought of some of them. But again, I challenge you to go and take a look for some of those answers, because you can find some of those answers, like what is a long-term drinking water advisory. You can see in the bottom where this information is coming from, so you could look that up and see how reputable that source is. But one thing to think about, updated in April 25th of 2022, so not too long ago as of the recording of this video. 132 long-term drinking water advisories have been lifted since November of 2015. So that's excellent news, but there are still 33 long-term drinking water advisories in effect in 28 communities. So again, based off their numbers, they are clearly not on track for their projection. Right? So again, quite a ways away and still quite a bit of work to do. If you've looked up what long-term drinking water advisories mean, I believe that means that the water would be undrinkable for at least a year. So you can imagine in 28 communities not having water, clean water that you can drink, like turn the tap on and drink it, in 28 communities for over at least a year. Right? Imagine doing that at your home, right? Not being able to turn on the water and use it for a day, the weekend, a week even. Right? I know when I moved into my new house, I did not have hot water for the first, say, 5 days. And that was painful enough. It was the winter. Trying to shower or bathe with ice cold water was not pleasant. And that's just heated water, let alone water. I could still use the water, but imagine not having any water that you could use at all without maybe having to boil it, or maybe not even that at all. Right? So again, just things to think about. So water issues have been in the forefront for Indigenous peoples for decades. It is just now that we are starting to hear about these issues. So this is everyone's issue, right? Going back to the information, going back to the lessons, right? The idea that water is sacred, water is life. We all need water to survive. Water needs to be clean and healthy in a sense to, as it's the blood of Mother Earth, we want to ensure that the earth is healthy as well, because that is where we live, right? I don't think we're finding anywhere else to live anytime soon, so we want to make sure where we live now is healthy, where it's good. It's a good place to live. And if you, again, follow those indigenous lessons, we need it to be good for the next 7 generations. Right? Or for our kids' kids, and so on. Right? So how can we all work together to protect our water? Right? So think about, what could we do? Right? You can look at the idea of climate change, right? So what can we do to ensure that we're reducing climate change? And you could look at corporate waste going into water, or corporate waste in general. Who's causing it? Right? Is it enough that once a year for Earth Day or Earth Week we shut off the lights at 8 o'clock for an hour or so? Right? What can we be doing? Is there more that we can be doing? Things like that. So finally, going into our practice, we will be looking at 3 different infographics on different topics kind of related to the idea of water, and just kind of conserving water, making it sustainable, protecting the environment, and so on. So these infographics contain data, quite a bit of data, in fact, and infographics are just a way to nicely arrange and present data rather than just throwing up your standard graph, and so on. So it's kind of a way to summarize a lot of information. So in the handout or in your practice worksheet, you're going to choose one of these infographics and go through and answer a few questions on them. Basically, you're going to analyze them, think about them. Is there anything you notice, anything that you wonder, anything that you're unsure of? Kind of what drew you to this, or what drew your attention on the infographic, and things like that. So again, take some time, go through the practice, or you can kind of take a look at some of these infographics now and maybe see if there's anything that you can see that you might question, or so on. But again, the main thing from this lesson is just the idea of reading graphs, understanding what the graphs are presenting, and starting to actually think critically about the information that's on there. So we're not just taking it at face value and saying, oh, that looks good, that's fine, but actually reading it, questioning it, asking questions, right? Thinking critically about what you're reading, because that is an important skill when it comes to looking at graphs, especially when others are presenting this information to us.